Hello everyone, David here. Now we are going to listen to podcast news which includes national, international and business, economy, news. While walking in the morning or evening, while cooking, cycling or during free time you can listen. It will enhance your learning and understanding of various accents and pronunciations. Listening improves the quality of communication and comprehension. Before going ahead, I would like to welcome you all to the virtual school. A new way of learning and teaching, with the vision of Let's Grow Together. Our mission is to learn how to learn and teach how to teach. So stay tuned. And here we go. Editorial 1. Media and Sedition. The Supreme Court's rulings on cases of sedition give hope the law will be re-examined. It has long been recognized that strident criticism of government will not amount to an attempt to excite disaffection and disloyalty towards government. Yet, the archaic and colonial view that an intemperate attack on an incumbent ruler should be met with fierce prosecution for sedition prevails among many in power even today. In a significant judgment, the Supreme Court has quashed a criminal case registered in Himachal Pradesh against journalist Vinod Dua by invoking the narrowed-down meaning of what constitutes an offence under Section 124A of the IPC, the provision for sedition, set out in Kedar Nath Singh, 1962. Every journalist, the court has ruled, is entitled to the protection of that judgment, which said comments, however strongly worded, expressing disapprobation of actions of the government, without exciting those feelings which generate the inclination to cause public disorder by acts of violence, would not be penal. The law on sedition has come a long way from the formulation of British-era judges Comer Petharam and Arthur Strachey that feelings of disaffection towards the government connote absence of affection, hatred, enmity, dislike, hostility, and every form of ill will towards the government, to the more rational reading that only a pernicious tendency to create public disorder would be an offense. Yet, it appears that every generation needs a judicial iteration of this principle, and that is because of two reasons: that Section 124A remains on the statute book and that powerful political figures and their minions are unable to take criticism in their stride. Enacted to put down journalistic criticism of the colonial administration from an increasingly vocal press, Section 124A is essentially a provision which seeks to protect the government's institutional vanity from disapprobation using the interests of public order and security of the state as a fig leaf. It has often been criticized for being vague and overbroad. Its use of terms such as bringing government into hatred or contempt and disloyalty and all feelings of enmity continues to help the police to invoke it whenever there is either strong criticism or critical depiction of unresponsive or insensitive rulers. The explanation that disapproval of government actions or measures with a view to altering them by lawful means will not amount to an offense is not enough to restrain the authorities from prosecution. The mischief lies in the latitude given to the police by an insecure political leadership to come down on the government's adversaries. It is unfortunate that the bench did not go into the aspect of political motivation behind the police registering furs without checking if the required ingredient of incitement to violence is present. The court's verdict brightens the hope that the section's validity will be re-examined. For now, it is a blow for free speech and media freedom. Thank you. Editorial 2. Diminishing options. The RBI has little room to use interest rates for achieving policy outcomes. The RBI's latest policy statement underscores the diminishing options available to it to address the economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. The bank's Monetary Policy Committee left benchmark interest rates unchanged for a sixth straight meeting and reiterated that it would keep its policy stance accommodative as long as necessary to revive and sustain growth on a durable basis. Since its May 2020 decision to cut interest rates by 40 basis points, taking the cumulative reduction in borrowing costs in the wake of the pandemic's onset to 115 basis points, the MPC has found itself in a bind. While the first lockdown constricted supply and demand for much of Q1 of the last fiscal, pushing the economy into a record 24.4% contraction during April-June and causing full-year GDP to shrink 7.3%, the second wave has crushed all-round demand and consumer confidence. The RBI's May round of the Consumer Confidence Survey shows the current situation index at a new all-time low, with 75% of households perceiving the economic and employment situations as having worsened further, and the Future Expectations Index reflecting overall pessimism. It is hard to see the mere availability of low-cost credit helping revive the all-important consumption demand. The MPC acknowledged the bleak outlook when it slashed its projection for Q1 growth by as much as 770 basis points to 18.5%, from the 26.2% it had forecast just on April 7. Banking more on optimism than hard data, the panel bumped up its growth estimates for the second half, resulting in an overall cut of only 1 percentage point to its full-year growth forecast at 9.5%. For this, it has assumed rural demand will remain buoyant on the back of an expected normal monsoon, while noting that widespread infections in rural areas, which likely led to a sequential decline in tractor and two-wheeler sales in April, could undermine future demand. The other factor the RBI is banking on to provide a fillip to economic activity is an accelerated pace of vaccinations, over which it has virtually no control. To be fair, Governor Shaktikanta Das has used the bank's liquidity spigot as a tool to address some of the economic distress. A series of measures focus on bolstering credit flow to the hardest-hit MSME and contact-intensive industrial and services sectors, respectively. Still, the MPC can ill afford to drop the ball on its primary remit, ensuring inflation remains anchored. With international commodity prices, including crude oil, on an upward trajectory and no signs of domestic policy support to check skyrocketing petrol and diesel pump prices, inflation is sure to accelerate, posing a major conundrum to the RBI. Raising rates could risk hurting recovery, and not doing so could heighten inflation. Thank you. Editorial 3. The red flags on the trail of the virus China's actions and the Wuhan lab connection do require closer scrutiny, even if the US may not find the smoking gun. Getty Images /iStockPhotoIPOPA /Getty Images /iStockPhoto. The publication of science writer, editor, and author Nicholas Wade's well-researched article in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, The Origin of COVID, Did People or Nature Open Pandora's Box at Wuhan? https://bit.ly/3uwxme, Hasid alarm bells ringing about the collusive cover-up of the possible leak of the novel coronavirus from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, with. He has laid out a strong case for a fuller investigation into the event. The US link. China promoted the narrative that the virus spread from a wet market, seafood and animal market, in Wuhan to avoid any scrutiny of what was being done in the with. Senior health officials in the United States seemed to concur. It soon became public that the coronavirus-related research in the with was funded by American money. Most experts embraced the natural spread narrative since the alternative was unimaginable. The lab leak proposition was discredited as a conspiracy theory simply because it was being espoused by then US President Donald Trump and his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. With advances in biotechnology, it is now possible to genetically engineer existing pathogens to make them more lethal and difficult to treat. Higher mortality and ethnic specificity could be the other features of such new, synthesized organisms, or viruses. A possible antidote or vaccine would only be accessible to those conducting such research. Dr. Peter Daszak of the EcoHealth Alliance obtained grants from the U.S. National Institutes of Health and subcontracted research to a group headed by Dr. Shi Zhengli at the WITH. Dr. Daszak claimed in a 2019 interview that after 6 years of research, over 100 new SARS-related coronaviruses, some of which were introduced into human cells in the lab, caused SARS disease in humanized mice and were untreatable. The research carried out involved the creation of novel, life-threatening and pandemic-creating viruses. The WITH operates a Biosafety Level 4, BSL-4, facility. Its deficient safety had been flagged by U.S. inspectors, but there is no record of any remedial action. A 2018 inspection report stated that the facility did not have appropriately trained professionals to safely operate the BSL-4 laboratory, https://wapo.st/3gbhkkj. A former Israeli intelligence official and visiting fellow at the Institute for Defense Studies and Analyses, Dani Shaham, now with the Bar Ilan University, Israel, has linked the WITH to China's biological weapons program, https://bit.ly/3gb1xh3. Why were American funds made available to a Chinese laboratory to conduct sensitive research? No doubt because it was less expensive and dangerous to carry out the experiments in China. Besides, US funding ensured it would have access to the experiments conducted at the WITH. In a recently released email, https://bit.ly/3co8xzb. Dr. Dasick thanked the director of the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Dr. Anthony S. Fauci, for publicly stating that scientific evidence supported a natural origin for the coronavirus and not a lab release. China's reactions. Admittedly, it is difficult to distinguish between a naturally occurring event, an accidental release of a genetically modified pathogen, or its deliberate use. Because of this and the lingering suspicions, it is the responsibility of the institution and the country where the first outbreak occurred to establish the facts. China has done the opposite. It has covered up facts and impeded the investigation. A 34-year-old doctor in Wuhan, Li Wenliang, tried to alert others on a social media platform from his hospital bed in Wuhan about a possible outbreak of a SARS-type virus. Instead of treating the young doctor as a hero, Chinese security officials vilified him and charged him with making false claims, spreading rumors, and disturbing the social order. He died as a result of a coronavirus infection. While he was officially exonerated by an investigation into his death, the report has been criticized for only having recommended the reprimand be withdrawn. There are also other reports of the police making an apology to his family. The WITH head of coronavirus research, Shi Zhengli's database on SARS-like viruses went offline just before the virus outbreak in Wuhan. Countries demanding greater transparency and accountability have been either denounced or punished by China. China's vehement opposition to further investigations, actions to suppress facts from getting out, and reluctance to share data only fuel the suspicion that China has something to hide. The release of the findings of the World Health Organization, WHO, on March 30 and revised on April 6, https://bit.ly/3fbdug, on the origins of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, coronavirus, that dismissed the lab leak as extremely unlikely actually energized the controversy instead of laying it to rest. Subsequently, the WHO Director General, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, called for further studies on the virus origins and said that all hypotheses remained on the table, dismissing the earlier findings as non-definitive. The WHO findings were tainted because Dr. Dasick, a self-declared partisan of the natural occurrence theory and with a personal financial stake in the WITH experimentation, was included in the inquiry team, https://nyti.ms/3uxfzn9. Together with a group of fellow virologists, Dr. Dasick had already declared in February that they stood together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that the virus did not have a natural, zoonotic origin, https://bit.ly/3w9007y. Including him in the WHO investigation team was akin to having a suspect investigate the crime scene. It is unlikely that U.S. President Joe Biden's call to the U.S. intelligence community, https://bit.ly/3clsoed, to collect and analyze information that could bring us closer to a definitive conclusion, and to report back to me in 90 days will result in a smoking gun being found. Unfortunately, the available evidence that is scant will compromise a credible forensic examination. Any determination of what went wrong will necessarily be circumstantial. Present and future dangers. That the coronavirus escaped from the WITH is in fact increasingly plausible. Whether this was a negligent or willful act can never be proven, but it is evident that the research at the WITH bioengineering more lethal coronavirus variants crossed ethical boundaries. The 1972 Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention, BWC, formerly known as the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, and Stockpiling of Bacteriological, Biological, and Toxin Weapons and on their destruction has no systems to verify compliance with its prohibitions, nor any enforcement mechanisms to penalize infringement of its provisions. These shortcomings have been repeatedly highlighted in the 5-yearly review conferences of the BWC, but the state parties to the BWC have been unable to agree on any measures to address them, thus compromising on biosecurity and willful breaches of the convention. Smallpox and other viruses have escaped from secure laboratories before. Public knowledge is that the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Atlanta, and the Russian State Research Center of Virology and Biotechnology, Kultsovo, are now the only 2 official repositories of smallpox spores, but there have been persistent fears that these have been disseminated, and certain countries are experimenting with genetically modifying them. Smallpox was deadly enough. Its improved version might be devastating. The coronavirus research conducted in the WIT for years is an example of science that has run amok, without ethical restraints or any code of conduct for the scientists, who appear to be bereft of any accountability. Such action threatens the very existence of humankind. This is why China's role requires closer scrutiny. Jayant Prasad is a former diplomat and a former Director General of the Institute for Defense Studies and Analyses. Thank you. Editorial 4. Embedded in Ambedkar's historiography, an ardent Indofil's poem on the life of Buddha stirred a rethink on conventional ideas of a philosophy. The Light of Asia, the poem that defined the Buddha. Jairam Ramesh Penguin/Viking 799 Indian rupees. Published in London in July 1879, The Light of Asia by Sir Edwin Arnold, a poem on the life and teachings of the Buddha, contributed greatly to the international community's knowledge of Buddhism and also played an important role in India's cultural awakening and social transformation. Jairam Ramesh highlights the influence it had on the subcontinent's leaders from Swami Vivekananda, Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. An excerpt from The Light of Asia, the poem that defined the Buddha, the biography of an epic poem written in blank verse. Edwin Arnold was a quintessential Victorian in every way. A remarkable polyglot, he was conversant in Greek, Latin, Arabic, Turkish, French, German, Japanese, Hebrew, Persian, Sanskrit and Marathi. For about 40 years he was a leader writer for London's newspaper The Daily Telegraph. He was a firm believer in the civilizing mission of the British Empire, but he was also at the same time an ardent Indophile. So far, Arnold had written a 2-volume study of Lord Dalhousie as Viceroy. He had published translations of 2 very well-known Indian literary classics. In addition, he had brought out a number of original poems on Indian themes. But in 1879 he would hit the jackpot, as it were, and bring out the blockbuster that would reverberate across the world. The Buddha was very much in the air, what with Rhys Davids, Max Mueller himself and Madame Blavatsky having generated up great interest in him. It was natural for a man of Arnold's background and inclinations to be drawn into writing something on this theme. The title page reads thus: The Light of Asia, or the Great Renunciation, Mahavinishkramana, being the life and teaching of Gautama, Prince of India and founder of Buddhism, as told in verse by an Indian Buddhist. So, from the beginning, it is clear that Arnold has adopted a novel technique. The life, character, and philosophy of Prince Gautama of India, the founder of Buddhism, are being depicted by the medium of an imaginary Buddhist votary. He does this because, as he says, to appreciate the spirit of Asiatic thoughts, they should be regarded from the Oriental point of view, and neither the miracles which consecrate this record nor the philosophy which it embodies, could have been otherwise so naturally produced. Clearly, the 2-year stint at Pune College had left an indelible imprint on Arnold. In his preface he says that he wants to elucidate on nirvana, dharma, karma, and other chief features of Buddhism, like the doctrine of transmigration, saying that it was his firm conviction that a third of mankind would never have been brought to believe in blank abstractions, or in nothingness as the issue and crown of being. He was taking the orthodox Christian critics head-on. The Light of Asia was in 8 books of blank verse, with some 500 or 600 lines in each. Impact on Ambedkar. The biggest political event of 1956, and indeed amongst the biggest ever in 20th century Indian history, was the conversion of Dr. Ambedkar to Buddhism, with lakhs of his followers, on October 14 of that year. Dr. Ambedkar had had a long engagement with Buddha and Buddhism, and the event came as no surprise. I tried to find out whether the Light of Asia had ever figured in his life. That Dr. Ambedkar was very familiar with Arnold's work is evident from the fact that he had 2 copies of it in his personal library, now at Siddharth College in Mumbai. But did the Light of Asia have any impact on Dr. Ambedkar? Here is what Akshay Singh Rathore, a noted scholar, had to say on this subject when I asked him whether the poem had meant anything to the key architect of the Indian Constitution. As for direct influence, it would be a stretch to say that it was in any way robust. But what is really the point of focus when thinking about Ambedkarite Buddhism are the points of rupture with the Buddhisms of his day, and the points of continuity with the classical literature, and primarily the Pali Canon. So coming then to indirect influence. Arnold awoke Kossumbi, and Kossumbi had a huge impact on Ambedkar. However, what influenced Ambedkar was not Kossumbi's transmission of ideas from Keynes/Arnold, but rather his break with them. What Rothower was referring to was the fact that by the 1940s Dharmanand Kossumbi had put forward a very radical explanation for Siddhartha's renunciation. Arnold's poem, and indeed all of Buddhist tradition, believes that the prince saw 4 sights in quick succession: an aged man, an ill man, a corpse, and a tranquil monk. The first 3 set him thinking on the nature of suffering, and the 4th on the way to salvation. Kossumbi had discovered Buddhism after reading The Light of Asia in 1899, and become a Buddhist monk and the first modern Indian scholar of Pali. Revisionist account. But in his posthumously published play in 1949 called Bodhisattva, Natak, Kossumbi wrote that it was not so much revulsion for the world and hope for nirvana that set Prince Siddhartha on his search for enlightenment, but actually it was his violent opposition to the use of force and conflict to resolve a water dispute between the 2 tribes, the Sakyas, to which his father belonged, and the Kaliyas, to which his mother belonged. It is clear that Kossumbi's late life rejection of the conventional wisdom on the motives for Prince Siddhartha's renunciation was fully shared by Dr. Ambedkar. There is absolutely no doubt that Dr. Ambedkar challenged the mainstream historiographies of Indic civilization through a revisionist account of the social and political role of Buddha and Buddhism in India's past. The Light of Asia was embedded in that historiography. This set him apart from others in India who were also great admirers of Buddha, like Tagore, Gandhi, and Nehru. Excerpted with permission from Penguin Random House, India. Thank you. Editorial 5. Behavioral change can reduce transmission. There are many methods rooted in behavioral science that we can employ to improve mask wearing. Most of us in India will agree that there are 2 large parts to this pandemic: medical science and human behavior. Universal vaccination will reduce infections, but with vaccine availability currently challenging, herd immunity is still many months, if not years, away. Lack of physical distancing and proper hand washing are among the reasons for daily new infections. But the biggest reason for the surge is that people are wearing masks inconsistently, incorrectly, or not at all. Data from a global survey of COVID-19 knowledge, attitudes, and practices, CAP, produced by the Johns Hopkins Center for Communication Programs show that from July 2020 to March 2021, India saw a 5% drop in mask wearing. In the 2-week period starting on March 15, 84% reportedly wore masks. However, the number varied subnationally and it was not measured whether the mask wearing was correct or consistent. Nevertheless, this is discouraging. While there will always be a minority who do not believe in the virus, masks or vaccines, a great majority would like to do what it takes to put this pandemic behind us. Relying solely on medical science, especially treatment, takes the agency away from the average people to act. Channels for communication. With behavioral data and strategic approaches, resources can be more efficiently used in reaching different audience segments with information through the channels they trust. Here are 7 ways, rooted in behavioral science, that we can employ to improve mask wearing and other COVID-19 prevention measures. First, we all need basic information on why masks are effective in preventing COVID-19 transmission. We also need to know who should wear them, when and where. We need clarity on what types of masks are most effective, how to wear a mask correctly, and when is it important to double mask. The COVID-19 CAP survey shows that scientists and health experts are the most trusted sources of information on COVID-19, followed by the World Health Organization, television, newspapers, radio, and local health workers. These trusted channels should be used together to share basic information. As new information becomes available that is different from, or that adds to, the baseline information that people have, it should be shared with everyone in a comprehensive and timely way. We should not discount or put down people's beliefs or misconceptions, but counter them with credible facts. Lemie, Sauer 2021. Addressing those barriers creatively through expert testimonials, infographics, and statistics that explain how masks have prevented infection transmission is important. Second, not everyone has the same information needs. Some don't believe that masks prevent COVID-19 infection, whereas some know and agree that masks do prevent infection but don't wear them consistently or correctly for various reasons. Communication to each group of people should be tailored accordingly. Generic messages saying wear your mask can only serve as reminders at best. They will not help someone who, say, only wears a mask when she decides that she is in a risky situation. For that person, the message should convince her that any situation outside the home can pose a COVID-19 risk and that masking up any time you leave your house is critical. Third, we need to communicate the benefits of mask wearing. We need to highlight stories that show how COVID-19 infections are low among communities where mask wearing is high. Sharing testimonials from people who wear masks regularly and explaining how they have managed to avoid getting infected could help. Making masks a symbol of being cool, for the image conscious, a sign of being considerate and respectful, for people who have elders and vulnerable people at home, and a badge of being smart, for those who want to protect themselves, could all be ways of reaching out to different kinds of people. Positive social norm. Fourth, we need to create a positive social norm around mask wearing. People are more likely to practice a behavior if they believe that everyone else is also doing it too. Each audience segment has its own influencers, whether in their community or in the media. Those influencers should be routinely seen wearing a mask or heard talking about it. Advertisements, messages, and visuals all positively reinforce mask wearing. Fifth, we need to enforce correct and consistent mask wearing. Many people do not follow proper masking behavior because there is no consequence for their inaction. We rely only on the police to enforce mask wearing. While that is needed, we should all take collective responsibility. We need language that shows us how to politely tell an unmasked or poorly masked community member to wear a mask. If each of us can influence the people around us, the positive multiplier effect of wearing masks will be significant in curbing infections. Sixth, we need compassionate leadership. Leaders, at every level, can play a positive or negative role in influencing our behavior. From the head of a family to the head of a country, leaders have to lead with empathy, and build and hold the trust of the people they lead. Religion, politics, and profit have no role when we are in such a dire situation. These leaders should themselves consistently convey and enact positive behaviors like mask wearing and vaccinations. The role of media. Seventh, we need responsible media. If fear of the threat, COVID-19 in this case, is stronger than our perception that we can do something about it, we will ignore the threat rather than trying to address it. APPM, WIT ETAL 1992. We look to the media for brave and honest reporting, and there have been some great examples of that during the pandemic. However, when many channels sow more panic than positivity, the audience grows numb. People feel that there may be no point in them doing anything if it is all doom and gloom anyway. In their helplessness, people indiscriminately share information, misinformation, and disinformation on social media. We need sections of the media to hold themselves to a high standard and report on much more than just burning pyres, struggling hospitals, the oxygen crisis, and vaccine and drug shortages. When we see uplifting and inspiring stories of prevention efforts, ideas, and innovations to promote masking, distancing, and vaccination, we will feel inspired to do our bit for prevention. If we want to finish this year being able to celebrate festivals, hug our loved ones, and enjoy a real holiday, we need to invest in a comprehensive, behavioral approach to address COVID-19 behavior. While no expense is being spared in engaging the best scientific experts from around the world to address questions and explain the pandemic, the human behavioral aspect has only been addressed in an ad hoc manner. Understanding, predicting, and shaping human behavior is a science too. Indeed, it is the less expensive way of digging ourselves out of the hole we are currently in. Uttara Bharat Kumar is a senior technical advisor for social and behavior change at the Johns Hopkins Center for Communication Programs, which is part of the Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins University. Thank you. Editorial 6. The question of nuance. While reporters inform the public, editorials help readers make sense of myriad developments. For years, I have referred to editorials in newspapers to explain a rather difficult word, perspicacity. The Oxford Dictionary defines it as the ability to understand somebody/something very quickly and accurately. Etymologists trace the origin of this word to the Latin word perspicacitas, which means discernment. Perspicacity is the power to discern what is going on beneath the surface. Journalism has two fundamental roles: informing the public and making sense of what's going on around us. While the role of reporters is to inform the public, the function of an editorial is to help readers make sense of myriad developments. Many readers were taken aback by the editorial, no comments, June 1st, on tennis star Naomi Osaka's decision not to attend the post-match press conferences at the French Open, which is a contractual obligation for players. The editorial dealt exhaustively with the interactions between sports personalities and journalists in the age of social media. It read, "In a universe where athletes prefer social media posts over media interactions, the official press conference is the last remaining avenue for probing questions that elicit insightful answers. Player-journalist interactions are the only substitute for source-based inferences that color the narrative." Closer home, MS Dhoni revealed his international retirement through Instagram and lapsed into silence. The challenges of mental health issues. The editorial acknowledged that some questions asked during post-match conferences are insensitive. This is vastly different from the multiple challenges posed by mental health issues. One of the readers, Vasudevan, felt that the editorial was written before Ms. Osaka decided to quit the tournament. He wrote, "The editorial has jumped the gun by stating that Osaka ignored nuance, dished out a lame excuse and trivialized the serious issue of mental health. In hindsight, it is obvious that it is the editorial that has trivialized the serious issue of mental health by not taking cognizance of what a champion player like Osaka is going through. If one goes through her on-court interviews of the past, one would find that she never was comfortable, though the real reasons were never known. Instead of trying to understand the problem, as not all individuals are made equal, other Grand Slam tournament authorities also joined French Open authorities in warning an already vulnerable individual. I agree with Mr. Vasudevan. Editorials should exemplify perspicacity, and in this context, Osaka's subsequent statement makes the editorial seem churlish. She spoke of experiencing huge waves of anxiety before speaking to the media and said that she has suffered long bouts of depression. This needs empathetic listening. But having expressed my reservation about the editorial and flagging the concerns of readers, I must acknowledge that the opinion pages made quick amends. A moment's lapse of empathy." Priti Ramamurthy, who has covered Grand Slam tournaments, wrote a reflective article, asking the right questions, June 3rd. She wrote, "There exists a larger question of what we expect from our sporting icons. Are we satisfied with them just doing their job, playing, winning, or do we want to get to know the person, the tactical genius, behind the champion? It takes a particular brand of mental fortitude to thrive in a punishing and lonely sport such as tennis. It is this trait that journalists most often want to probe and showcase." She rightly pointed out that the ideal way to do this is through long-winded, private chats. On the same day, the president of the Public Health Foundation of India, K. Srinath Reddy, wrote an article stressing on the need to look at the delicate subject of mental health more closely. He also documented the hypocrisy of sporting bodies. He wrote, "The French Tennis Federation did not cover itself in glory when it displayed an utter lack of empathy towards a vulnerable young woman who rose to the top of the game because of her immense talent and not because of her speaking abilities." To add irony and insult to injury, Gilles Moreton, the president of the French Tennis Federation, made a statement to the press about Osaka's withdrawal and left without fielding questions. The incident lays bare deep hypocrisy. As an ombudsman, my special respect for sports journalism stems from the fact that it effortlessly straddles the two worlds of public interest and what the public is interested in. Even a moment's lapse of empathy will derail this fine balance. Thank you. Editorial 7. Recognizing sex work as work. Adults who earn by providing sexual services should be granted basic labor rights. Tamizachi Thungapandayan. The pandemic has hit millions of people and caused a great deal of suffering across communities. But there is one community that is especially hard hit, and that is sex workers. Owing to the non-recognition of sex work as legitimate work, sex workers have mostly been kept at arm's length from the government's relief programs. COVID-19 has thus provided more reason to consider a long-pending demand of sex workers in India: decriminalization of sex work and a guaranteed set of labor rights. An archaic, regressive view. The legislation governing sex work in India is the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act. The Suppression of Immoral Traffic in Women and Children Act was enacted in 1956. Subsequent amendments were made to the law and the name of the act was changed to Immoral Traffic Prevention Act. The legislation penalizes acts such as keeping a brothel, soliciting in a public place, living off the earnings of sex work and living with or habitually being in the company of a sex worker. This act represents the archaic and regressive view that sex work is morally wrong and that the people involved in it, especially women, never consent to it voluntarily. After all, in popular depiction, entry into sex work is involuntary, forced, and through deception. As a consequence, it is believed that these women need to be rescued and rehabilitated, sometimes even without their consent. While this is a valid argument for minor girls, for many consenting adult sex workers, it has been a problem. This is what has led to the classification of respectable women and non-respectable women. This view is based on the belief that sex work is easy work and no one will or should choose to practice it. It thus perpetuates the prejudice that women who do practice sex work are morally devious. The act has not only criminalized sex work but also further stigmatized and pushed it underground, thus leaving sex workers more prone to violence, discrimination, and harassment. The act denies an individual their right over their bodies. Moreover, it imposes the will of the state over adults articulating their life choices. It gives no agency to the sex workers to fight against the traffickers and in fact, has made them more susceptible to be harassed by the state officials. The act fails to recognize that many women willingly enter into agreements with traffickers, sometimes just to seek a better life as chosen by them. Evidence shows that many women choose to remain in sex work despite opportunities to leave after rehabilitation by the government or non-governmental organizations. Labor rights. The Justice Varma Commission had also acknowledged that there is a distinction between women who are trafficked for commercial sexual exploitation and adult, consenting women who are in sex work of their own volition. We must recognize sex work as work and stop ourselves from assigning morality to their work. Adult men, women, and transgender persons in sex work have the right to earn by providing sexual services, live with dignity, and remain free from violence, exploitation, stigma, and discrimination. It is time we rethink sex work from a labor perspective, where we recognize their work and guarantee them basic labor rights. The judiciary is moving in the direction of recognizing sex workers' right to livelihood. The Supreme Court, in Budhadev Karmaskar v. State of West Bengal, 2011, opined that sex workers have a right to dignity. Parliament must also take a real look at the existing legislation and do away with the victim rescue rehabilitation narrative. During these times of crisis especially, this is all the more important. T. Sumathi, A. Tamizachi Thungapandiyan is MP, South Chennai Parliamentary Constituency. Thank you. Faith. Liberation from curse. Kamsa, who wanted to kill Devaki, was convinced by Vasudev's words, and spared her life. Why did Kamsa pay attention to Vasudev? That was Krishna's Leela. And even assuming he listened to him, a sensible person would have kept Devaki and Vasudev apart from each other, thereby ensuring that they would have no children. But Kamsa did not. That too was Krishna's Leela, said V.S. Karanakaracharya, in a discourse. Devaki's first son was named Kirtiman and Vasudev took the infant to Kamsa. Kamsa did not kill the baby. But Narada arrived, and addressed Kamsa. He said that the message given to him by the voice had spoken of the eighth child of Devaki. But which way was the count to begin? If one took the eighth child as the first, and counted in reverse, then the first child would become the eighth child. If this reverse counting was resorted to, then the child now before Kamsa would be the killer he had been warned of. Even otherwise, this child, if allowed to live, would only help the rest of Devaki's children. Convinced by this argument, Kamsa killed the child Kirtiman. Why did Narada do something so wicked, we might ask? Actually, Narada was only doing the first 6 children of Devaki a favor. Hiranyakasipu had a cousin called Kalanemi, and the latter's sons were all Narayana Bhaktas, like Prahlada. Hiranyakasipu cursed them that they should be killed by Kalanemi. But Kalanemi refused to kill them. So they were born as sons of Devaki, and were killed by Kamsa, for it was Kalanemi who was born as Kamsa. With this killing, they were rid of Hiranyakasipu's curse, and attained moksha. To attain moksha quickly is what such devoted souls would want. Narada's words ensured their quick exit from this world, and could only have pleased such bhaktas. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching this video as a podcast. Do like, share and comment. Press the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to get new notifications. Thank you. Take care and stay safe. God bless you all. Jai Ma Bharti. To download news and editorials in MP3, follow us on Telegram, Virtual School. The link is provided in the description below.